It was nearly 20 years ago. I found myself working in a large warehouse just like this. I was working for a contracting company who was contracted to go into the building and take out all the equipment and then clean it all out. We got to the end of that job, and I remember my boss looking at me and saying, you know, part of the contract is that now that we've got all this equipment out of here, somebody needs to sweep it. And Zarowski, you're the guy. He handed me a large broom about this big, and I started going row by row, back and forth in this huge building, probably an acre in size. And you know, I could have not gotten any closer to the center of that building. All the litter laying around me and everything else, and I think it was probably one of the first times I ever really felt like God was trying to speak to me and say something to me. I remember stopping there in the middle of that huge warehouse with all this litter around me, and it was like I could hear God in my mind saying, son, I've called you to preach the gospel. I want you to be a voice for me to your generation. And I remember standing there feeling like, you've got to be kidding me. Look at me, God. I'm here. I'm sweeping this building. This is what I'm probably capable of. And it was so clear to me that I was supposed to step down, get down, and pick up a piece of paper and write down the things that the Lord was speaking to me. So I did that. I grabbed this little piece of paper, and I had a pen with me, and I began to scribble on there the best I could. Folks, I could barely even spell. I don't know if I even spelled the words right. I'm writing on this piece of paper all the things that I felt like the Lord was speaking to me. I stuck it in my pocket, tears flowing down my face, and I kept on pushing. I kept on going that day, and I remember at break time, I called my pastor at the time, Pastor Paul Krebs, great man of God, gone on to be with the Lord right now, and I called him up and I said, Pastor Krebs, I need to speak to you. And he said, well, how about next week? Would that be okay? We'll get together next week. And I said, Pastor Krebs, I need to get together with you today. I mean, I'd do it right now if I could leave work, but I need to get together with you today. And Pastor Krebs giggled on the phone and he said, okay, I'll see you after work. Very nervous, I got into my truck and I drove to the church office, and I remember walking through the door, nervous and scared, just a young man and not understanding what was going on. And I saw Pastor Krebs sitting in his office, and I reached in my pocket and I grabbed hold of that piece of paper. Tears began to flow down my face. I couldn't even speak to him. I walked up to him and I handed him that piece of paper, the little chicken scratch that I had written down that God had called me to preach the gospel, to be a voice to my generation. I handed it to him. He looked at it and he began to laugh. Well, folks, I want to tell you something. This insecure young man felt real insecure at that point. I began to weep. And at that point, Pastor Krebs began to weep also. He was weeping and laughing at the same time. And I finally got the nerve to say, what are you laughing at? And he said, Tom, it's true. God has called you to preach the gospel. And I know you feel inadequate, and I know you feel like you can't do it. And all throughout the day, I was sitting there going, God, I graduated with a 4th grade reading level. I'm afraid to talk to people. I'm scared of all these different things. And it was kind of like saying, God, are you sure you got the right guy? I don't feel like the right guy. I was just an old pot-smoking, beer-drinking pervert that gave his heart to Jesus and had his life changed. But I didn't know how to speak. I didn't know how to talk to people. I loved people. I was probably actually more concerned about myself than anybody, but I really did care about people. But he told me, he sat there and he said to me, he said, I know you feel inadequate, but I want you to know this morning, the Lord spoke to me. And he told me he was going to call you into ministry. And that's why I'm laughing and crying at the same time. You see, I know God spoke to me. And he said, Tom, if you don't believe it, you can call my supervisor. I called him this morning to tell him, just in case you didn't believe me. You know, this story reminds me of a very important person in history that we read about in the Bible, actually in Exodus chapter 3 and 4. We read about the story of where God showed himself to Moses in a burning bush. God says, Moses, I've called you to go and deliver the children of Israel out of bondage. I want you to go and speak to Pharaoh. And Moses says, God, this experience, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but this experience is great. You're speaking to me out of a burning bush. This is holy ground, but I'm not sure you have the right guy. You see, God, I'm not eloquent in speech. I don't know what to say. The people, they're not going to listen to me. I'm not even sure that they'd even like me. In fact, I know that they wouldn't. And Lord, there's got to be somebody else beside me. And God said, no. Moses, you're my man. You're the one I want to use. You see, the fact that they don't like you, the fact that you are weak, the fact that you can't speak, makes you a perfect candidate for me to use. Why? Because I'll get all the glory. Today, some of you may be sitting there at your desk or at your home, and maybe the Lord has called you to do something, and you've given Him 100 excuses why you can't do it. What are you saying to Him? What are you saying to Him? Are you telling the Creator of the universe He doesn't know what He's doing? Are you telling the one that formed you in your mother's womb that He doesn't know you? And it sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? But by telling God that we can't do it, we're telling Him that we don't trust Him. We're telling Him that He doesn't know what He's doing. And friends, I would say this: God knows what He's doing. When He made you on purpose. He made you with a purpose. You have a destiny to fulfill. If God's speaking to you today and He's telling you to do something, and maybe you're afraid, that's okay. It's okay to be afraid. Just don't give God 100 excuses of why you can't do it. But rather look to Him and say, God, I am scared, but I know that through you I can do all things. Remember it, because it's true. Through Jesus Christ, you can do all things. He may be asking you to do something that seems so astronomical to you. It's okay, because through Him, you can do all things. I hope you have an awesome week. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.